In just 72 seconds, Jasmine Crockett turned a live congressional hearing into political shockwaves felt across America. Cameras caught Pam Bondi calling her a disgrace to the flag, and what happened next made millions gasp in disbelief. The marble walls of Capitol Hill have heard fierce debates, but never a public takedown this raw, this personal. What truth did Jasmine unleash that left her rival frozen? And the nation asking if justice still has a pulse. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol wasn't just another building today, it was a fuse, and someone had already lit it. The air outside carried the sharp bite of winter, but the real chill came from the sound. Two crowds faced off across the plaza, their chants colliding in midair. Justice for all. Answered by law and order now, in a call and response of pure defiance. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras panning between handmade signs and clenched fists. But the real fight wasn't out here. It was about to erupt inside. Beyond the front doors, the marble halls of the Capitol felt different, like stepping into the minutes before a verdict is read. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras panning between handmade signs and clenched fists. But the real fight wasn't out here. It was about to erupt inside. Beyond the front doors, the marble halls of the Capitol felt different, like stepping into the minutes before a verdict is read. Security officers stood in rigid formation, eyes scanning every face, every movement, their hands close to their holsters. The usual bustle of aides and staffers had been replaced by a low, steady hum, the sound of people waiting for something they couldn't predict but knew would be explosive. Inside the hearing chamber, the atmosphere was suffocating. Floodlights burned down from the rafters, bleaching the wood in an unnatural glow. Every seat in the public gallery was filled, every reporter's, and was posed midair. The press cameras' red recording lights blinked like tiny, unblinking eyes. Even the microphones on the tables seemed to lean forward, as if eager to catch every word that would follow. Pam Bondi was already in position. Her posture was a weapon, shoulders square, chin lifted, eyes fixed straight ahead. A thick folder bound with black ribbon lay in front of her, perfectly center, as though she'd rehearsed the image for weeks. She tapped one manicured nail against the folder's edge in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the faintest smirk curling her lips. It wasn't confidence, it was certainty, the kind of look someone wears when they believe they've already won. Across the aisle, an empty chair waited for Jasmine Crockett. Its emptiness wasn't a void, it was a magnet. Every glance in the room seemed to drift toward it, as if the chair itself promised something the cameras couldn't afford to miss. The press gallery was already locked on it, ready to catch the exact frame when that emptiness was filled. Somewhere in the labyrinth of hallways beyond, footsteps began to echo, slow, deliberate, the kind of pace that says, "I'm not rushing, because I own the next moment." Jasmine Crockett was on her way. She carried a red folder under her arm, its contents unknown, but whispered about all morning. A memo, a recording, proof, no one knew, but the speculation alone had the room strung tight like a wire. The chamber doors creaked open, and the noise outside vanished into a thick, perfect silence. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, cameras zoomed. In that instant, the air shifted, not with the start of a debate, but with the certainty of a collision. Some rooms hold debates. This one was built for a reckoning. Pam Bondi didn't even wait for the chair's gavel to echo. Her voice sliced through the charged silence like a blade. "Jasmine Crockett," she began, her tone dripping with contempt, "is a disgrace to the flag." A low, drawn-out "oh" rippled from the back rows, a few in the public seating leaning toward each other in sharp whispers. A middle-aged man frowned and shook his head, while a young woman in the front row gripped the strap of her handbag as if holding back words she wanted to shout. A pause just long enough for the words to settle like poison in the air before she went in for the kill. She funnels taxpayer dollars into criminal sanctuaries, harboring lawbreakers, while our police officers bleed in the streets. The words hit like shrapnel, each one designed to wound not just politically, but personally. A sharp intake of breath rippled across the chamber. Someone in the gallery muttered "God," before catching themselves. Reporters' pens scratched violently against paper, camera shutters clicked in rapid succession, and from the far corner, a Fox News mic was already live, the correspondent mouthing, "She just called her a disgrace." The air in the room seemed to constrict, like every molecule was listening for the next blow. Pam leaned forward, her eyes glinting under the lights. "You've turned your district into a haven for chaos," she pressed on, voice rising. And you stand here pretending it's justice." She jabbed a manicured finger toward Jasmine's empty chair. But now Jasmine was there, seated and still, her posture almost statuesque. That red folder rested in front of her like a cold serpent, unmoving but dangerous. Jasmine didn't flinch, she didn't even blink. Her gaze locked on Bondi with the kind of stillness that unnerves predators, a calm so deliberate it feels like a trap. The corner of her mouth twitched, but not into a smile. It was more like the ghost of a thought passing through, one she wasn't ready to share yet. Bondi took Jasmine's silence as weakness and pressed harder. "Tell me, Congresswoman, do you even understand the oath you took? Or is the Constitution just a prop to you, like everything else in your so-called career?" The insult was naked now, stripped of all pretense. Gasps broke through the crowd like small detonations. A man in the back row shook his head in disbelief. Another leaned forward, eyes locked on Jasmine, as if urging her to strike back, but she didn't, not yet. She reached out, slowly, and rested her fingertips on the red folder. She tapped once, twice, soft, deliberate. And then she just sat there, letting the moment stretch thin. In that unbearable stillness, the balance of power in the room began to shift. People started to lean forward, not toward Bondi's voice, but toward the woman who hadn't spoken a word. Tam smirked again, mistaking patience for surrender. She couldn't see it yet, the storm Jasmine was holding back. But the rest of the room could feel it, thrumming under the surface like a war drum. She could have fired back instantly, but Jasmine knew waiting would hurt more. Jasmine's fingertips rested on the red folder, the air around her vibrating with a tension that felt almost physical. Then tap, 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 3 soft strikes against the cardboard cover, barely audible over the hum of the cameras, but enough to send a ripple through the people who knew what it meant. Her staffers shifted in their seats, posture tightening, eyes locking on her as if bracing for detonation. It wasn't a nervous tick, it was a code. And every insider in her orbit could hear the countdown starting. Outside the Capitol, the winter wind whipped through the barricades, rattling metal like a warning. In the middle of the crowd, a woman stood apart, clutching her phone with both hands. Her name was Angela Torres, and the man on her lock screen was her son, wrongfully convicted, serving year 12 of a 30-year sentence. She was watching the live feed, earbuds pressed in, her lips trembling as Jasmine's image filled the screen. She didn't know what the red folder held, but she prayed it might carry something that could finally crack open the system that stole her child. Back inside, Bondi kept talking, her voice rising with self-assurance, unaware she was already standing on a trapdoor. Jasmine didn't look at her. She was scanning the room instead, reading the shifts in body language, noting which lawmakers leaned forward, which ones hid behind their notepads. Every second stretched like taffy, pulling the audience tighter into the unknown. A cameraman in the gallery zoomed in on Jasmine's hands. The image of that red folder, her nails resting on it like a pianist about to strike the first note, began flooding television screens across the country. Viewers at home didn't understand the signal either, but they could feel the pull. Something was about to change, and everyone knew it. Bondi leaned back in her chair, mistaking Jasmine's silence for submission. But in the press section, a veteran political correspondent whispered to her colleague, "She's not losing, she's loading." The words seemed to hang in the air, their truth vibrating in the space between breaths. In exactly 72 seconds, this room will never be the same. Pam Bondi straightened in her chair, the black ribbon folder now open like a freshly unsheathed blade. She slid a stack of charts across the table toward the committee clerk, her voice sharp and precise. "Here's the truth," she declared, clicking a remote that brought giant bar graphs onto the screen behind her. In Jasmine Crockett's district, violent crime has risen 42% in the past 2 years. Burglaries are up, assaults are up, homicides up. She let the numbers hang in the air like a sentence being read aloud, her gaze sweeping the chamber as if daring someone to dispute her. The camera cut to Jasmine, who sat motionless, her hands still resting on the red folder. Bondi took that as a green light to keep pressing. "These neighborhoods have become a war zone under her so-called leadership," she went on, stabbing her finger toward the screen. "She funnels taxpayer dollars into programs that coddle criminals instead of protecting victims." The words war zone flashed across LED broadcasts, instantly becoming chyron headlines. That's when Marcus Hill, seated 2 chairs away from Jasmine, leaned forward, his voice slicing through the tension. That's cherry-picked data and you know it, Pam, he snapped, his tone more soldier than statesman. You're ignoring the context, you're ignoring the facts that don't fit your narrative. A stir swept the audience, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. But before Marcus could continue, the chair's gavel slammed down hard. Order, Mr. Hill, you're out of turn. The reprimand landed like a slap, silencing him mid-breath. Bondi smiled a thin, predatory curl of the lips as if she'd just scored a point. She clicked to the next slide, a heat map glowing crimson over Jasmine's district, the deep red blotches pulsing on screen. This is what happens when you put ideology above safety, she said, voice low but cutting, each syllable meant to wound. Cameras caught her leaning slightly toward Jasmine, eyes locked like a sniper sighting her target. In the gallery, the murmurs grew. Viewers at home saw the picture Bondi was painting, a district under siege, a leader asleep at the wheel, and for a moment, it worked. She was building a case, a crooked one, but one with teeth, sharp enough to draw blood if left unanswered. Bondi let the crime maps fade from the screen, but kept her gaze locked on Jasmine, her tone shifting from prosecutorial to venomous. And let's be honest, she said, voice dropping into that performative calm that always precedes a blade. Congresswoman Crockett is soft on crime not by accident, but by design. She shields offenders because she identifies with them, because of where she comes from, because of who she surrounds herself with. The last words hung like a toxic cloud, heavy with racial undertones that every ear in the room caught instantly. The gallery erupted in subtle but telling body language, some leaning back with arms crossed tight, others pitching forward, eyes wide. In the corner, a reporter jotted down the quote verbatim, pressing harder than usual as if carving it into the page. A ripple moved through the gallery. A man in the second row raised his eyebrows at the woman beside him. She shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight. In the press gallery, a veteran reporter glanced at his colleague with a look that said, she just crossed the line. Even the chair's gavel hesitated, the authority figure at the center of the room gauging whether to intervene. Cameras zoomed closer to Jasmine's face, searching for a reaction, a flinch, anything. Bondi leaned forward, emboldened by the silence. Her so-called reforms don't just fail to protect honest Americans, they empower the worst among us. Gang leaders, career criminals, drug traffickers. These are the people who benefit from her policies. And if you think it's just bad policy, you're not paying attention. This is deliberate. She paused, letting the implication bleed out into the chamber. And her political allies, those same far-left extremists, stand right beside her, clapping while our streets burn. In the crowd, the murmurs turned sharper, edged with disbelief and anger. Some sat back in their chairs, arms crossed. Others leaned forward, eyes darting between Bondi and Jasmine as if waiting for an explosion. On television screens across the country, viewers could see it too, the way the air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, the way every second stretched into a dare. Jasmine still didn't move. She kept her eyes fixed on Bondi, but the calm in her gaze was no longer just composure, it was the look of someone who has already decided exactly how the next scene will unfold. The red folder in front of her remained untouched, but it might as well have been ticking. The insult wasn't just political, it was personal, and Jasmine knew it. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't even reach for the microphone. Instead, she lowered her gaze to the red folder as if Bondi's words were nothing more than static in the background. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, flipping one page, then another, sliding a yellow tab onto certain sections without breaking rhythm. To the untrained eye, it looked like idle busy work, but to anyone who'd seen her in the courtroom, it was the prelude to something lethal. Bondi sat back in her chair, mistaking the silence for surrender. A smirk tugged at her lips as she leaned slightly toward the mic, clearly savoring what she thought was her upper hand. The audience picked up on it, some shaking their heads, others whispering as if Jasmine's inaction confirmed Bondi's accusations. Even the cameras lingered on Bondi's face, capturing the predator's satisfaction in what she believed was a kill shot. But in the press gallery, Marcus Hill's aide caught sight of Jasmine's pen moving just 3 deliberate strokes under a single paragraph and stiffened. He'd seen that move before. It meant she had the exact quote, timestamp, and corroborating evidence ready to go. On the other side of the room, one of Jasmine's legal advisors subtly shifted forward in his seat, hands clasped, like a soldier awaiting the order to charge. The chamber was now caught in a strange gravity, Bondi's voice filling the space, but all eyes drifting, almost involuntarily, back to the woman in red who still hadn't spoken. Each turn of a page sounded louder than it should have, the soft flick of paper over paper landing with the weight of a loaded chamber being spun. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter scribbled a single note. "She's waiting for the perfect shot." Bondi kept talking, piling on accusations, her tone growing more casual, almost mocking. "Nothing to say, Congresswoman, not a single word." She prodded, leaning forward as if trying to pierce the stillness. Jasmine's eyes finally lifted from the folder, locking onto Bondi's with a steadiness that made the other woman pause for half a beat. A pause she quickly masked. Jasmine didn't answer. She simply closed the folder halfway, slid it an inch closer to the microphone, and rested her hands on either side of it. The energy in the room shifted again, like a current pulling everyone toward a drop-off they couldn't see. No one moved, no one breathed. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's the sound of a sword being sharpened. Jasmine didn't rush. She slid the red folder open with deliberate care, pulling out a single sheet of paper, then reached for the microphone. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe the public deserves to hear something before we continue." Without looking at Bondi, she pressed a small black remote in her hand. The chamber's big screen behind the dais flickered from the crime maps Bondi had just shown to a grainy still image of a closed-door meeting room. A low hum filled the speakers, followed by a woman's voice, clear, sharp, and unmistakably Pam Bondi's. "Protecting poor defendants," the voice said, "doesn't win elections." The words landed like a hammer blow in the dead quiet room. Two men in the middle row exchanged a loaded glance, lips moving soundlessly. At the far end, a congressional staffer brought her hand to her mouth, eyes locked on the massive screen, as though afraid to blink. For a second, no one moved, then a collective gasp rose from the gallery, breaking the silence like shattering glass. Reporters' heads snapped down to their phones, fingers flying as breaking alerts began to light up screens across the nation. Cameras zoomed in on Bondi's face, capturing the faint but undeniable twitch at the corner of her mouth, the first crack in her armor all morning. Jasmine didn't let the moment breathe. The audio kept playing, the voice continuing. "We need to redirect funds to where it matters, our donors' communities, not those people." The emphasis on those people made several lawmakers shift in their seats. In the gallery, Angela Torres, still watching on her phone outside, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Viewers at home could see it too. The line wasn't just cynical, it was toxic. Bondi tried to interject, leaning toward her mic. "This is taken out of context," but the chair's gavel slammed down. "The witness will remain silent until the audio is finished." The order echoed in the chamber like a verdict. Bondi's hands tightened into fists on the table. The recording rolled on for another 20 seconds, each line painting a picture of deliberate neglect, of calculated cruelty dressed as policy. Jasmine watched Bondi the entire time, her eyes unblinking, her hands folded neatly on the folder as though she had all the time in the world. By the time the clip ended, the air in the room was thick with something heavier than tension. It was judgment, and it had already begun to tip. For the first time, Bondi blinked. Jasmine pushed her chair back with a slow, deliberate scrape that cut through the hushed chamber like a blade drawn from its sheath. She rose, red folder still in one hand, and took 2 measured steps toward the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was steady but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Justice," she said, her gaze locked on Bondi, "is not for sale. And you've been selling it cheap." The words didn't echo, they landed, heavy and direct, pulling every head in the room toward her. Bondi leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That audio was taken out of context. She shot back, trying to keep her voice even. "This is just another example of the media twisting facts to push a partisan agenda." She gestured toward the press gallery, as if they were co-conspirators in some elaborate smear campaign. A few in the audience shifted in their seats, but no one missed the faint tremor in her voice, the telltale sign of someone losing their grip on the narrative. Jasmine didn't blink. "Out of context," she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "You didn't just misspeak, Ms. Bondi. You laid out a business plan, one where justice is a commodity, and certain lives are worth less than others." Her tone was calm, but the room felt it like a gut punch. Cameras zoomed closer, catching the small muscle in Bondi's jaw twitching. Bondi's eyes darted to the chair as if looking for rescue, but the gavel remained still. "If the Congresswoman wants to mischaracterize private strategy discussions," she began, but Jasmine cut her off, stepping fully into the open space between their tables. The room seemed to shrink around them, like a boxing ring with two fighters circling for the final blow. "This isn't strategy," Jasmine said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the low hum of whispers. "It's a confession, and the people watching at home, those same poor defendants you dismissed, know exactly what you meant. They've lived it." She turned slightly, sweeping her gaze across the committee members and the gallery, forcing them to feel the weight of her words. Bondi tried to recover, a tight smile breaking across her face. "Well, I suppose the Congresswoman will read anything into a sentence if it suits her cause," but the smile didn't reach her eyes, and the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Jasmine leaned forward, lowering her voice so it carried with more force the context you're asking for. She paused, holding the silence for a beat. "It's about to get much worse." Jasmine didn't take her eyes off Bondi as she reached for the microphone. "Since we're talking context," she said evenly, "let's hear from someone who lived through the consequences of your policies." She gestured toward the side entrance of the chamber, and the double door swung open. A man in a worn gray suit stepped forward, carrying nothing but a battered leather briefcase. His name, Robert Hayes, flashed briefly on the lower third of the live broadcast. Former public defender, 18th Circuit. Hayes moved slowly to the witness table, the lines on his face deep enough to tell their own story. When he sat down, his voice was quiet at first, almost too quiet for the room's size. "I served as a public defender for 22 years, he began. "I represented people who couldn't afford a lawyer, people who were told the system would treat them fairly." He paused, his eyes locking on Bondi. "And then, 1 year after your cuts, my office was gutted. We lost half our attorneys. We stopped taking cases not because we wanted to, but because we couldn't." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Jasmine let him speak without interruption, her hands folded neatly over the red folder. Hayes continued, his voice gathering weight. "One of those cases we couldn't take belonged to a young man named Miguel Torres. He was 19, no record. He sat in county jail for 11 months, without trial because he couldn't make bail and had no lawyer to fight for him." In the gallery, a reporter glanced up sharply, realizing what the viewers outside already knew. Angela Torres, standing in the cold, watching on her phone, was Miguel's mother. Hayes' voice cracked for the first time. "That boy. He took a plea deal just to go home, even though he swore to me he was innocent. That conviction will follow him for the rest of his life." The silence in the room thickened. Even Bondi had stopped tapping her pen. Jasmine leaned forward, her tone razor sharp. "Ms. Bondi, you said protecting poor defendants doesn't win elections. Tell me, was Miguel Torres a liability to your campaign strategy?" Bondi opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The cameras caught a single frozen frame of the woman, who had been so sure of her footing, now caught mid-fall. Hayes closed his briefcase and stood, the scrape of the chair legs against the floor cutting through the silence. The image of him walking out of the chamber burned itself into the live feed. Viewers across the countryside felt it. This wasn't just an exchange of policy points anymore. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal justice. Marcus Hill had been silent long enough. He pushed back his chair, the leg scraping the floor like a warning shot, and rose with a thick binder in his hand. "Madam Chair," he said, his voice measured but edged with resolve, "the Department of Justice has released its most recent crime data for Congresswoman Crockett's district." He opened the binder, sliding a set of laminated charts onto the witness table. "And it tells a very different story from what Ms. Bondi would have you believe." The big screen lit up again, this time with a crisp DOJ seal in the corner. Marcus pointed to a series of blue and green lines trending downward. "Violent crime, down 18% over the last 2 years. Property crime, down 23%. Homicide rate, the lowest it's been in over a decade." The data was clean, sourced, and verifiable, everything Bondi's slideshow had deliberately avoided. The audience stirred, murmurs rippling like a wave through the chamber. Bondi slammed her hand against the table. "Those numbers don't account for the real situation on the ground," she snapped, cutting him off mid-sentence. "People are still scared to walk their streets at night." Her voice rose, carrying a sharpness that felt less like conviction and more like desperation. The chair's gavel rapped once, but Bondi barreled on, refusing to yield. I talked to real Americans, not just bureaucrats who manipulate spreadsheets to protect their allies. The camera cut to the gallery, where the discomfort was palpable. A woman in the second row crossed her arms tightly, while a man beside her glanced toward the exits as if trying to escape the tension building in the room. Reporters exchanged quick looks, their pens pausing mid-note. On television screens across the country, the split screen told its own story. On one side, Bondi's face flushed and animated. On the other, the calm, irrefutable DOJ char standing silently behind Marcus Hill. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his next words filled the space like a closing door. Ms. Bondi, fear is not a statistic, but facts are. And the facts are that your claims are wrong by every credible measure we have. He tapped the binder once, sealing the point. Bondi's lips pressed into a thin line. She straightened in her chair, her jaw tightening, eyes darting toward the cameras as if searching for a lifeline. She wasn't ready to admit defeat, not here, not now, not in front of millions. But Bondi wasn't ready to lose, not yet. Jasmine didn't wait for the murmurs to fade. After Marcus Hill sat down, she leaned into her microphone, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Ms. Bondi, she began, since we're talking about credibility, perhaps we should revisit your own record. The chamber stilled, as if everyone had felt the floor tilt beneath them. She opened the red folder, pulling out a series of documents clipped neatly together, each page marked with yellow tabs like surgical incisions. 2014, Jasmine said, holding up the first document. A major real estate developer in your state, also a top donor to your campaign, was under investigation for tax fraud. The case disappeared from your office in less than a month. No charges filed, not because the evidence was weak, but because the man in question hosted a fundraiser for you 2 weeks later. A low murmur rippled through the gallery, and the cameras cut to Bondi's face still, but her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The screen behind them flickered to life with a flashback-style still. Bondi, a lavish dinner table, champagne in hand, seated beside the developer in question. The image, grainy but damning, lingered for a few seconds too long. Jasmine's voice didn't waver. 2016, a private prison corporation donates $50,000 to your political action committee. 3 months later, you drop a case alleging abuse and neglect in one of their facilities. That prison is still operating today, still profiting from bodies, many of whom should never have been there in the first place. The audience shifted uneasily, some leaning forward as if they needed to see more, others crossing their arms as though bracing for impact. Reporters, 10 scratched frantically, the sound merging with the faint hum of the camera crews adjusting their shots. On screen, another flashback photo appeared. Bondi shaking hands with the CEO of the prison corporation, both smiling under a banner that read Partnership for Safety. Bondi finally spoke, her voice edged with irritation. These are cherry-picked moments taken completely out of context, but Jasmine cut her off with the precision of a scalpel. No, Ms. Bondi. This is the full picture, the trail of favors and payoffs showing exactly who gains when you put a price tag on justice, and who gets shut out when they can't pay it. There was no mistaking the weight in her tone now. It wasn't just accusation, it was indictment. The room seemed to lean toward her, the collective awareness that the line between past and present was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The past has a way of sitting in the front row. Outside the Capitol, the winter wind cut through the crowd, but the tension was hotter than asphalt in July. Eleanor Price stood in front of the live camera, hair whipping in the gusts, one hand pressed to her earpiece. We're seeing cracks in Bondi's defense, she said, her voice pitched low but urgent. After an hour of sustained pressure, Jasmine Crockett has managed to drag the conversation from statistics to the shadowy trail of influence and money that's been following Bondi for years. And from the look on Bondi's face inside, the blows are landing. Behind her, the protesters' chants rose again, this time louder, angrier, like they just smelled blood. On screen, the broadcast cut to a rapid montage of social media feeds, tweets flashing by in real time, hashtags surging, hashtag justice not for sale, hashtag Bondi exposed, hashtag Crockett vs Bondi. One post read, Crockett's receipts are airtight, Bondi can't wriggle out of this. Another shot back, classic smear campaign, Bondi's right, media is twisting it. The split in opinion was raw, each side feeding off the other's fury, pushing the fight beyond the marble walls of the Capitol and into every living room in America. Back inside, the chamber felt tighter, the oxygen thinner. Bondi shuffled her papers, eyes flicking to the press gallery more often than the committee, as though trying to gauge how badly she was bleeding in the court of public opinion. Jasmine sat still, but there was something different in her posture now and knees, a quiet confidence, the way a chess player relaxes when she can see checkmate 5 moves ahead. Eleanor's voiceover continued, over live shots of the hearing. If Bondi can't regain control of this narrative in the next few minutes, she's done. And she knows it. In the background of her report, Angela Torres was visible in the crowd, clutching her phone with white knuckles, her eyes locked on the screen as if willing Jasmine to deliver the final strike. The camera panned back to the chamber. A faint hum of conversation drifted through the air, committee members leaning toward one another, exchanging thoughts they didn't want caught on mic. Bondi raised her chin, but the cameras caught the subtle tremor in her hand as she adjusted her notes. She wasn't just answering questions anymore, she was fighting the gravity pulling her down in front of millions. Inside, the air was about to ignite. Bondi straightened in her chair, eyes narrowing like a fighter finding one last reserve of strength. "Madam Chair," she announced, her voice carrying a sudden force, "I have one more witness, someone who's seen the real consequences of Congresswoman Crockett's so-called reforms." She gestured toward the side door, and the heavy oak panel swung open. A man stepped through in full uniform, polished shoes, gleaming badge, the kind of posture that still carried command. The chyron on the broadcast spelled it out: Chief Raymond Cole, retired, and, in living rooms across America, the weight of that title landed instantly. Cole approached the table, every step slow and deliberate, as though rehearsed. "I've been in law enforcement for 37 years, he began, his gravelly voice filling the chamber. "I've watched our city slide into chaos since these reforms took effect, officers quitting in record numbers, criminals back on the streets before the ink is dry on their arrest reports. And I lay that squarely at the feet of policies championed by Congresswoman Crockett." His words rolled heavy, each one framed to sting. Bondi leaned back slightly, letting him speak without interruption, her eyes darting to the cameras to capture her satisfaction. Cole continued, painting a picture of neighborhoods in fear, officers demoralized, a justice system unraveling. He described a shooting last fall, a victim killed by a man released under bail reform, and he said the name like a verdict, letting it hang in the air. Through it all, Jasmine sat perfectly still. No frown, no scoff, no hand raised to object. She watched him the way a hawk watches from a high branch, unblinking, patient. The camera found her face more than once, and viewers at home could see it, not passivity, but calculation. She was taking in every word, filing it away, letting the story build just high enough to topple under its own weight. Cole slammed his hand lightly on the table for emphasis. "We are not safer today. We are more vulnerable than I've ever seen," the gallery murmured, some nodding, others tightening their lips. Bondi leaned forward, seizing the momentum. "Chief Cole's experience speaks for itself," she said, her voice sharp, her gaze cutting toward Jasmine. "These are the consequences of ideology over reality." Jasmine's eyes moved from Bondi to Cole and back again, still no response. Just that quiet, unshakable calm that made the silence feel like it was humming. Bondi mistook it for hesitation. The audience could feel it was something else entirely. Let them throw everything, then bury them with the truth. Jasmine finally moved, leaning into her microphone with the kind of measured control that made the entire chamber lean forward. "Chief Cole," she began, her voice steady, "you served a long career, and no one here doubts your years in uniform. But before we treat your testimony as gospel, I think the public should know who's been signing your checks since you retired." She reached into the red folder, pulling out a stack of documents bound with a crimson clip. The screen behind her flickered to life, displaying the logo of a multi-billion-dollar private prison corporation. The room went still. Jasmine clicked to the next slide, a scanned contract bearing Cole's signature, outlining his role as a security consultant for the company, paid at $250,000 a year plus bonuses tied directly to prison occupancy rates. "You've been earning $250,000 annually from a business that profits when more people are incarcerated," Jasmine said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "So when you argue against reforms that would free those unjustly held, you're defending your own income stream, not the safety of our streets." The gallery erupted. Gasps, mutters, even a few shouts broke the decorum. Several people half rose from their seats, craning for a better view of the document on screen. Chairs creaked, underscoring a chorus of low, heated mutters. In the back row, a young man hastily pulled out his phone to record, ignoring the rule against it. Security shifted closer to the dais, their eyes scanning the crowd as the tension spiked. Bondi's head snapped toward Cole, her face tightening, but the cameras caught the flicker of panic before she could mask it. Cole opened his mouth to respond, but the noise in the room drowned him out. Jasmine didn't let the uproar fade before pressing harder. "And it's not just a consultancy," she added, flipping to another document, an internal memo from the corporation, listing Cole as a key advocate for lobbying efforts to block bail reform and increase mandatory sentencing. She read a line aloud. "Our partnership with Chief Cole continues to yield positive legislative results, ensuring steady inmate intake." Her eyes locked on Cole's. "That's not public safety, Chief, that's a business plan." Cole tried to speak, but the chair's gavel came down hard. "Order. The witness will remain silent until recognized." The chamber quieted just enough for the microphones to pick up the murmurs. "Unbelievable," caught red-handed. Bondi leaned toward her mic, attempting to salvage the moment. "This is a distraction, an attack meant to smear." But the words rang hollow, swallowed by the damage already done. The image of Cole's contract and the prison logo lingered on the big screen like an indictment in bold print. And just like that, Bondi's witness became her burden. Jasmine rose from her seat, not to address the committee, but to face the gallery. Her eyes swept over every row, holding each gaze long enough to make the air feel heavy. "Justice," she began, her voice low but carrying, "is not a commodity. It's not something you auction to the highest bidder, or something you lock away for those who can't afford it." She let the words hang before stepping closer to the edge of the dais, her tone sharpening like a blade being drawn. "Justice is the promise we make to every citizen, and the moment we sell it, we lose the right to call ourselves a democracy." She turned slightly, gesturing toward the big screen still displaying the contract between Chief Cole and the prison corporation. This is what happens when power serves profit. Policies written to fill cells, not to protect communities. Lives destroyed because empty beds are bad for business." Her voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction, the kind that could be felt in the chest. "The measure of a nation is how it treats its most vulnerable. And right now, the record shows we've been failing them deliberately." The camera caught Bondi watching her, lips pressed thin, the rhythm of her breathing quickened. But Jasmine wasn't looking her way anymore. She was speaking past her, straight to the millions watching from home. To the mothers who've buried sons before their time. To the fathers working 3 jobs and still praying their children won't be caught in a system built to break them. To every person who has been told their life is worth less than someone else's, hear me now. You are not disposable. And I will not stand by while anyone in this chamber tries to make you so. The shot cut abruptly to the protesters outside. Angela Torres stood at the front, phone still in her hand, tears streaking down her cheeks as she listened. Around her, the chant swelled into a roar. "Justice for all, justice for all." Flags waved, fists rose, and the sound carried back through the marble walls, faint but undeniable, as if the crowd itself had answered Jasmine's call. Back inside, she returned to her seat without another word. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged, the kind that comes when everyone knows something irreversible has just happened. Bondi sat rigid, eyes fixed on her notes, but her grip on the pages betrayed the strain. But one final card remained unplayed. Jasmine didn't waste the momentum. She reached into the red folder, one last time, and withdrew a thin, cream-colored document sealed in a plastic sleeve. "This," she said, holding it up so the light caught every letterhead, "is a memo from 2017. It shows Ms. Bondi personally lobbied state legislators to block a bill that would have compensated victims of wrongful convictions, people who lost years, sometimes decades, behind bars for crimes they did not commit." Her voice was steady, but the undercurrent was volcanic. The big screen behind her flickered to life. The memo's header "Office of the Attorney General" filled the frame, followed by a highlighted passage in Bondi's own handwriting. "Such bills create unnecessary fiscal burdens and incentivize frivolous claims." Jasmine let the words speak for themselves, the silence stretching taut before she pressed a button on the desk. A video began to play. First, a man in his late 50s appeared on screen, gray hair, eyes clouded with exhaustion. "My name is Clarence Mitchell," he said. "I spent 26 years in prison for a murder I didn't commit." TNA cleared me. I got nothing, no apology. No help, his voice cracked, and the chamber was silent except for the soft buzz of the speakers. Next came a woman mid-30s, her hands trembling as she spoke. I was exonerated, after 8 years. They took my 20s, my job, my family. When I asked for compensation, I was told there was no budget for me. Her gaze lifted to the camera, direct and unflinching. People like Ms. Bondi made sure of that. In the gallery, you could hear the shift, the scrape of shoes as people leaned forward, the muffled gasps, the murmured "my God." Reporters were no longer scribbling, they were staring. On the split-screen broadcast, Bondi's face stayed frozen, her lips pressed so tightly together they'd lost their color. Jasmine spoke again, her tone now surgical. This was not a budget decision. It was a deliberate decision to turn your back on the innocent because their freedom had no value in your political marketplace. She glanced briefly toward Angela Torres in the crowd, her face half lit by the glow of her phone screen. Some debts can't be paid back, but some can. And Ms. Bondi fought to make sure they never were. The final shot in the video was a still image of a cell door closing, the clang echoing through the chamber speakers. The sound seemed to reverberate off the marble walls, lingering in the air like a ghost. Bondi's pen rolled from her fingers and clattered against the table, a tiny sound, but one that felt like a crack running through the center of her defense. Even the wall seemed to lean in closer. Bondi gripped the edge of the table, leaning toward the mic. "This," she began, but the word barely escaped before a wave of boos crashed over her. It started with a few voices in the gallery, sharp, hand-cutting, then swelled into a wall of sound that drowned her completely. The nose was raw, unfiltered anger, the kind that didn't just disapprove, it condemned. She tried again, her lips moving, but not a single word carried over the jeers. The chair's gavel slammed once, then again, the sharp cracks ricocheting off the marble walls. "Order. This chamber will maintain decorum." But the gavel was no match for the current in the room. People were no longer just spectators, they were a jury delivering their verdict in real time. Reporters stood halfway out of their seats, cameras trained on Bondi's face, capturing every twitch, every falter. She glanced toward the press gallery, as if searching for an ally, but all she found were lenses staring back at her. Her voice rose, desperate now. "These attacks are political theater." The boos grew louder, layered with shouts, "Resign! Shame!" An elderly woman in the front row thrust a finger toward Bondi, mouthing "enough" over and over, while a cluster of young men in the far right corner stomped their feet in sync with the chants. A security guard swept the crowd with a hard stare, bracing for a possible escalation. The chair stood, pounding the gavel hard enough to rattle the microphones. "One more outburst and I will clear the gallery." The threat momentarily softened the roar, but it didn't erase the tension. It simply condensed it, like steam inside a locked chamber. Jasmine sat motionless, hands folded, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to speak. The silence from her side of the table made Bondi's flailing seem even more chaotic. Every second Bondi talked, her words dissolved into the noise, leaving only the image of a woman fighting a battle she'd already lost. In the back row, a man in a navy suit leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "She's done." The comment wasn't meant for the microphones, but it was picked up anyway, the words bleeding faintly into the live feed, a quiet confirmation of what millions watching had already decided. Bondi sank back into her chair, trying to mask the tremor in her hands by shuffling papers that no longer mattered. The gavel came down one final time, the sound echoing like a closing door. The audience stilled, but their eyes stayed locked on her, not with curiosity, but with the cold certainty reserved for the defeated. The room wasn't just against her, it was done with her. Jasmine waited until the last echo of the gavel faded, the tension in the chamber wound so tight it felt like one more breath could snap it. She stood slowly, her chair sliding back in a whisper that somehow cut through the stillness. Her gaze swept the room, past Bondi's crumpled posture, past the committee members shifting uneasily, past the press gallery with their pens frozen mid-word. She didn't raise her voice, but the clarity in it made every head lift. "Justice," she said, pausing just long enough to let the word stand alone, "isn't a privilege, it's the people's right." The sentence landed with the precision of a final verdict. For a heartbeat, the room was perfectly still, as if the air itself was processing what had just been said. Then the sound came, first a single clap, sharp and defiant, then another, and another, until it rolled into a wave of applause that hit the walls like a storm. People in the gallery stood, some shouting her name, others pounding the rail in front of them. The chair didn't call for order this time. Even in the world of politics, there are moments you don't interrupt. Bondi sat frozen, her eyes locked on the table, the papers in front of her now nothing but white noise. The cameras, however, weren't interested in her anymore. They were locked on Jasmine, catching the faint rise and fall of her chest, the glint of conviction that hadn't dimmed through the hours of crossfire. She didn't smile, didn't bask in the reaction. She just stood there, letting the room decide what it would carry away from this day. Outside, the sound carried to the steps of the Capitol. Protesters who had been chanting for hours now cheered, waving signs high above their heads. Angela Torres, phone still in hand, pressed it to her heart, tears streaking her face as she mouthed the 9 words to herself like a prayer. News alerts lit up devices across the country, headlines already framing the moment. Crockett's 9 words shake the Capitol. The applause inside finally began to fade, but the energy remained, dense and unspent. Jasmine returned to her seat, her movements deliberate, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She had dropped the last stone into the water. The ripples would have to take care of themselves. But would America listen? After the cameras went dark, the corridors of the Capitol were quieter now, but the tension hadn't bled out, it had only changed shape. Jasmine moved through them flanked by Marcus Hill and 2 senior aides, the applause from the chamber still faintly ringing in her ears. They slipped into a closed-door conference room deep in the building, the kind with no windows and a single heavy lock. The door shut, muffling the noise of reporters shouting questions outside. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of coffee gone cold and the weight of what had just happened. Marcus dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Media's already split," he said. "Half the headlines are calling it a reckoning. The other half are calling it a hit job." One aide slid her tablet toward Jasmine's screens filled with live polls, hashtags trending in real time, and the beginnings of op-eds that would define the next 48 hours. Hashtag Justice Enough Forcel was climbing past 1 million mentions. Hashtag Bondi Exposed wasn't far behind. Jasmine scanned the headlines without reaction, her fingers lightly drumming the edge of her coffee cup. "Fallout's coming fast," Marcus continued. "Bondi's donors are already in damage control mode. We can press the advantage, push the wrongful conviction compensation bill back into the spotlight while she's on the defensive," another aide leaned in. "If we move too aggressively, they'll frame it as opportunism. We need a strategy that looks like service, not vengeance." Jasmine finally looked up, her eyes tired but unwavering. This was never about vengeance. It's about leverage, and right now, we have it. But we also have to be ready for what they'll throw next. She set her coffee down and leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Every time you stand up in that room, you burn political capital. Every time you name names, you make new enemies. That's the cost, and the bill always comes due." There was a moment of silence, the kind that comes when everyone knows the truth but rarely says it aloud. Marcus broke it with a wry smile. "You knew they'd come after you harder after this." Jasmine nodded. "Of course, that's how you know you hit the right nerve." In her mind, she could still see Angela Torres in the crowd outside, phone pressed to her chest, mouthing those 9 words. That was the real measure, not the headlines, not the trending tags. "We didn't do this to win applause," she said softly, more to herself than the room. "We did it so no one else gets swallowed by a system designed to turn human lives into profit margins." They began drafting the framework for the next push hearings, press statements, outreach to victims groups. The conversation shifted to dates and numbers, but the undercurrent was clear. Today was only a chapter, not the book. Winning a battle doesn't end the war. The morning after, America woke up to Jasmine Crockett's face on every screen. The networks didn't just cover the hearing, they dissected it frame by frame. On CNN, a panel of legal analysts replayed the moment she dropped Bondi's memo, calling it the most devastating use of evidence in a political hearing in the last decade. Over on Fox News, commentators accused her of political theater and grandstanding for the cameras, their clips looping the boos in the chamber as if that was the whole story. MSNBC's Chiron reads simply, "Crockett's 9 words shake the Capitol." The montage cut between studios, each with its own spin. One op-ed headline from the Washington Post flashed, Crockett just changed the conversation on justice, another from a conservative blog countered. Jasmine Crockett's cynical smear campaign will backfire. The split-screen coverage became its own battlefield, every commentator speaking not just to inform but to mobilize. Then came the voices that weren't on payroll. A local news station in Jasmine's district ran interviews from a community center she'd fought to keep open. A middle-aged man in a work jacket said, "If it weren't for those reforms, my nephew would be sitting in prison right now over a mistake he didn't make." In another clip, a young mother pushed a stroller while saying, "She's the first politician who's ever shown up here and stay," after the cameras left. The footage shifted to a rural county miles away from Jasmine's base. An older woman, hair pinned back, shaking her head in disapproval. "She's dangerous," the woman said into the mic. "If you make it easier for criminals, you put all of us at risk." The next frame jumped to a veteran, in a wheelchair, his voice steady. "The danger isn't in giving people a fair shot, it's in thinking some folks don't deserve one." Social media feeds poured across the screen, hashtags rising like temperature gauges. Hashtag Justice and Not For Sale trended at #1 for 16 straight hours. Clips of Jasmine's 9 words racked up millions of views on TikTok, often set to dramatic music or paired with slow-motion reaction shots from the hearing. At the same time, hashtag Bondi Strong trended among her supporters, with posts framing her as the victim of a DC ambush. In between the no's, Angela Torres appeared on a local affiliate, her voice trembling but clear. When she spoke yesterday, she wasn't just talking to them in that room, she was talking to people like me. People who've been told to sit down and shut up while our families disappear into the system. The clip went viral overnight, drawing comments from strangers who'd never heard her name before. It was no longer just a political fight, it was a cultural flashpoint. The lines were drawn, the stories multiplying, each one reframing what had happened inside that marble chamber. And now, it wasn't about what Jasmine had said or what Bondi had denied, it was about which version of the story America would choose to believe. The court of public opinion had opened for its own trial. The camera framed Jasmine alone at the table now, the hearing room emptied of the day's chaos. No committee members, no audience, just her, the mic, and the steady red light of the broadcast lens. She leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished wood, eyes locked into the camera as if speaking to one person at a time. Her voice was quieter than it had been all day, but sharper for it. "We can't buy justice," she said, letting the words settle for a beat, "but we can build it. Brick by brick, case by case, truth by truth, until it stands strong enough that no one can tear it down for profit." She didn't blink, didn't smile. That work, it's not glamorous. It doesn't happen in a single hearing or with one speech. It happens in the grit, in the nights when no one's watching, in the moments when standing up feels more dangerous than staying silent. A pause measured, deliberate before she leaned in just slightly. And it happens when you, the people watching right now, decide that justice is yours to claim, not theirs to give. Her hands clasped in front of her, a subtle grounding gesture. They will tell you it's complicated, they will tell you it's too expensive, too messy, too impossible. But the truth is, they just don't want to pay the price that fairness demands. And the only way we change that is together, loud enough, long enough, relentless enough that they can't shut the door on us again. She sat back, the weight of the day in her posture, but not in her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing more, and the silence became its own statement. The screen faded to black, white text appeared against the void. Comment below what justice means to you. Then, slowly, an image faded in the Capitol dome under the night sky, its white glow stark against the deep blue, a lone light burning in one of the high windows. The shot held, unbroken, until even the glow seemed to breathe, and then it was gone. Justice is not a gift reserved for the powerful, it is a birthright, forged and defended by those with the courage to speak when the world tells them to stay quiet. This story is a reminder that one voice, armed with truth, can shake walls built to silence it. Real change begins the moment we decide that fairness is worth the fight, even when the cost is high. Power yields only when people demand it, together and without fear. So I'll ask you, when your moment comes, will you stand in the shadows? Or will you rise and help build the justice we all deserve? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.